the Windsor-Essex Local Immigration Partnership, and they were going to go ahead with community consultations. But the Diversity Committee says that it had no idea that there was this other proposal happening by the Multicultural Council until it became public. So now they feel like both groups are essentially working on the same project, so they're feeling quite blindsided.
All of a sudden, the wool, the carpet was pulled up. Underneath us.
It was a little bit of a confusion and shock at the same time. It's basically discrediting or dismantling everything we've been working on.
The committee members say work was well underway with WeLip. Alsadia Tia says she's not upset about the $200,000 in funding going to the Multicultural Council, but says the duplication is what gets her.
How are we putting these two things together? I feel like it's a replica.
The mayor's chief of staff says the goal is for the Multicultural Council and the Diversity Committee to work together moving forward. But Alsadia Tia questions why then the committee wasn't consulted, even though it was named as having been.
The city lied.
But the mayor's chief of staff says though talks didn't happen specifically around this proposal, consultation did take place. He says over the course of the last year, the mayor and members of our team, city administration, mayor's office held dozens of meetings with members of various external and internal diversity groups, including the Diversity Committee. What was heard from those discussions ultimately fed into this process and vision. He added that the Multicultural Council does tremendous work in the community and is exactly the kind of organization that should be undertaking this project. But EJ challenges that.
The MCC has no knowledge of what anti-racism is about.
He questions the ethics of it too, because Councillor Fred Francis is the Multicultural Council's Director of Programs and Development, even though Francis recused himself from discussions and voting during last week's meeting. He's also upset that Councillor Ed Sleeman, who sits on the Diversity Committee, didn't advocate for the group.
And instead, he voted to have this thing go to MCC. And we just think it's a travesty that they would do that.
Neither Francis or Sleeman responded to CBC's request for comment. Now, threats of resigning hang over the committee.
I don't know if I want to continue being part of this, you know?
I wouldn't hold them back if they were to resign because they find themselves, they're putting in all this work and all of a sudden someone just pulls it from underneath them. You know, they're disillusioned. I should be. I am angry. I am very angry. We're the most ineffective and the most toothless committee that you would ever find because the city set it up that way and intended to ignore that committee from day one anyway.
Now, Chris, I should mention that Council did pass a motion last week that dictates that the MCC does need to report back to the Diversity Committee with its progress on their anti-racism initiative. But even still, EJ, the chair of the Diversity Committee, says that he plans on fighting this tooth and nail, and he's going to encourage other groups to do the same. In the meantime, the Diversity Committee's project with WeLip is at a standstill. Members of the Diversity Committee are still debating whether or not they're going to call it quits, but EJ says he is not going anywhere. He's staying put because he wants to continue to offer representation as best as he can. Chris.
Thanks, Kat. CBC's Katerina Georgieva live from City Hall tonight. The push continues to get people vaccinated in Windsor, Essex. Thousands of COVID-19 vaccines in our region will expire in the coming days. Amy Dodge spoke with a local pharmacist and expert who are questioning why public health didn't plan for this.
Rob Modestino runs a pharmacy in LaSalle. He hasn't used a dose of AstraZeneca for 3 weeks, and now the rest of the batch will spoil.
AstraZeneca is a horrible situation. I mean, I'm sitting right now on 190 doses that expire at the end of August that I'm never going to use. Like, it's to the point now where when we do get one or two people, we end up using one dose out of a vial of 10 and have to throw that vial away after 48 hours just because there's no demand for it at all.
And he's aware of other pharmacies with Moderna. That supply will expire as early as tomorrow, and there is no plan for the extra doses of vaccine to be sent to another pharmacy or city to use it.
From an ethical point of view, it's very, very problematic.
Kerry Bowman is an ethicist. He says Canada should have had a plan long before now.
The Delta variant is surging all over the world, and the vast majority of people in low-income countries have had absolutely no access to any kind of vaccine. So it's horrible that this is happening.
The Windsor-Essex County Health Unit says it also wants expiring dosages to be sent to other countries, but that is not a local decision. Instead, it is working with the ministry to avoid any vaccine waste and calling on more people in our region to be vaccinated.
Obviously, I'm concerned with the low uptake. And I want to increase that number for my region.
Vaccination rates for Windsor-Essex fall short of the provincial average. More people being vaccinated would decrease vaccine waste, but that doesn't stop the inevitable. Thousands of dosages that came into our region, meant to keep people protected from COVID-19, will spoil on a shelf before that happens. Amy Dodge, CBC News, LaSalle.
CBC News reached out to the Ministry of Health. They were not able to respond in time for this broadcast. Windsor Regional Hospital says that the facility no longer has any COVID-19 patients. Now, the last time that this happened was 9 months ago, last October. The hospital's CEO is encouraging people to get vaccinated to avoid anyone being hospitalized or dying because of COVID. And with school a little more than a month away, local English school boards have released their opt-out deadlines for in-person learning. Those with children in the public board have between tomorrow and August 6th to opt out. All elementary and secondary students currently enrolled for in-person learning will have the option to opt out. Remote learning will be available. The Catholic School Board gave parents and students the opportunity to opt out before June 4th. Ottawa's plans to begin reopening borders this month could be hampered by a labor dispute. The two unions that represent border service employees, they say they've been given a strike mandate by their 8,500 members.
If we're forced to call a strike because of the government's inaction, CBSA employees could potentially take strike action as early as August the 6th, depending on the date when the Public Interest Commission's recommendation is issued.
The unions say border workers are regularly subjected to harassment, workplace violence, and intimidation by management. The CBSA has already said it is putting contingency plans in place in case there is a strike. The Montreal Canadiens continue to face criticism over a recent draft pick. They selected defenseman Logan Mailloux from Belle River, who most recently played in Sweden, where he was charged after taking and sharing a sexually explicit picture of a woman without her consent. Matt Demore reports from Montreal.
And Montreal is going to the Stanley Cup Final!
It was only a few weeks ago, a fairy tale playoff run for the Montreal Canadiens that electrified the city and the country. But now the focus is on a controversial draft pick.
The Montreal Canadiens are proud to select the Knights de London défenseur Logan Mailloux.
It was a moment the 18-year-old hockey player said he didn't want. Last week, Mailloux asked NHL teams not to select him in the draft, following news he'd recently been charged and fined in Sweden for taking and sharing a sexually explicit photo of a woman without her consent.
I sent it to my teammates to impress them. I've apologized to her, but nonetheless, this will follow her for the rest of her life.
Jennifer Drummond manages the Sexual Assault Resource Center at Montreal's Concordia University. She says the Habs should have respected Mailloux's request and worries what message the team has sent by picking him.
It almost gives a sense of like, oh, it's no big deal, just come on down anyways, no problem. So I don't think that's going to be helpful for people, and especially upsetting, I think, for people who have been on the other side of this kind of issue.
Habs general manager Marc Bergevin defended the pick, saying the team will give Mailloux the support he needs.
He's a young man who made a serious mistake of judgment, and we really have to work with him. And we did talk to him, and he's fully aware of that, and we're very remorseful.
Isabelle Charret, a former Olympian and Quebec's minister responsible for the status of women, tweeted her disappointment with the pick. She said having athletic abilities is one thing, but those who possess them should be role models, on and off the ice. Matt Demore, CBC News, Montreal.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was asked about this earlier today during a news conference in New Brunswick.
As a lifelong Habs fan, I have to say I am deeply disappointed by the decision. I think it was a lack of judgment by the Canadiens organization. I think they have a lot of explaining to do to Montrealers and to fans from right across the country.
25-year-old swimmer Kylie Moss is among Canada's latest medalists in the pool. The LaSalle native earned a well-deserved silver in the women's 100-meter backstroke in Tokyo. Watching from across the world, her parents, who celebrated at their home in LaSalle. They spoke to CBC's Sanjay Maru about their daughter's big win.
Silver medalist, Canada. Kylie Moss.
Oh, it was just very gratifying to see her accomplish something, and I'm sure she'll be very happy with what she achieved. For us, it was just a joy to watch and cheer her on.
There's Canadian Kylie Moss, 25 years of age.
The final of the women's 100-meter backstroke. Hayley McEwen, the world record holder from Australia, is in 3. Regan Smith from the U.S. in 4. Kylie Moss from Canada is in lane number 5.
What are your thoughts on not being able to attend the games in person and see Kylie swim in person? How badly do you wish you could have been there?
Oh, that's probably the hardest part of this whole thing. Yeah, no, the plan was to go with the family, just like we did in Rio, and COVID had other plans, so.
And they're head-to-head. McEwen might have a slight edge, and she takes it. Moss the silver, Smith the bronze medal. It's an Olympic record for McEwen. It's a silver medal for Canada and Kylie Moss.
We're watching her flourish here. What's that like for the two of you?
It's her thing, right? I mean, we do whatever we can to help make it easier. But I mean, we don't really even talk swimming with her. It's more of we're kind of the other side of what goes on in her life.
I'm sure for people in this community, especially those who are following the Olympics closely, when Kylie comes back to LaSalle, she's the superstar. She's Kylie Moss. For you two, is she that superstar?
Oh, she's just our daughter.
Yeah, just another pain in the ass kid. Just kidding.
Gotta love that support for the family there. Canadian athletes, they've added to their medal haul in Tokyo, finishing on the podium in several sports. That includes weightlifting. Maj Sharon became just the second Canadian in history to win Olympic gold in that sport. There's still a lot more competition ahead, though. Douglas Gellivan looks at what's in store.
As we get ready for day 5 in Tokyo, all eyes back in Canada will once again be on the pool tonight as a couple of Canadians go for gold in the water, starting with Penny Alexiak, who has a chance to make history in the 200-meter freestyle. If the 21-year-old Toronto swimmer makes the podium, it will be her 6th Olympic medal, the most by any Canadian athlete at the Summer Games. That race goes at 9:40 Eastern Time tonight. And later, Halifax's own Sydney Pickram will be shooting for the podium in the 200-meter IM. She finished 6th in this event 5 years ago in Rio, and she withdrew from the 400 IM in order to focus in on this race. Now, if the weather holds and we can get the boats in the water, Canada will have a shot at the podium in the women's double sculls. Canada's rowing program did not perform well in Rio 5 years ago. This would mark the first medal of the Tokyo Games for the program if the two women can do it. In tennis, both of Canada's hopes in the men's and the women's singles have ended, but there is renewed hope as the doubles competition gets underway on day 5. Felix Auger-Aliassime and Gabriela Dabrowski will be representing Canada in mixed doubles. They have a stiff test in their first match against Greece and their rising star player, Stefanos Tsitsipas. And lastly, it's unclear if one of the biggest stars in the game, Simone Biles, will continue to compete in Tokyo after the American withdrew from competition on day 4. She told a reporter that her head just wasn't in it after doing one of her vaults, and she feared she might get hurt if she kept competing. Now, right now, she says she's taking things day to day with the individual all-around and the apparatus finals still to come. And here's a look at the medal count heading into day 5. Canada off to a great start with 2 gold, 3 silver, and 3 bronze. USA leading the way with the overall medal count of 25. Japan still leads the way with the most golds with 10. Douglas Gellivan, CBC News, Toronto.
A lot of us here have our eyes set on the track events. Those should be coming up this weekend. A lot of people in Windsor, Essex competing on the highest stage, cheering loudly out here. If you've got a watch party or anything planned for these Olympics, let us know. Let us see how you're watching our athletes compete on a stage that, well, looks a lot different than it used to. We take a look outside here. We see the heat. You can feel it when you step outside. How long does it last? Colette Kennedy with those details next. Colette Kennedy joins us for a live look at the forecast. Bit of a scorcher out there. You can almost see the heat when you look outside, those waves and stuff that are forming. But it's hot, buddy.
Yeah, it is hot. And it's kind of an interesting situation because actually there's been a cold front that's been working its way across the province, across southern Ontario. But sort of the last area to be tagged or even affected by this is southwestern Ontario. And that's why temperatures are a little cooler. Goderich at 22, we're seeing 24 towards Kitchener, still holding there now 29 degrees for Windsor. There's some humidity. Again, kind of like yesterday, it's there, but it's not too extreme. So we've got our Humidex values there in the low 30s, and that includes for those of you in Sarnia. Now, the winds behind the front, you see more of a look at the arrows more than in terms of the wind speed. It's not that interesting, but the arrows show that northwesterly flow behind the front, and we're seeing that now too towards Windsor and towards Leamington and for Chatham-Kent. And as we get into that, I do just want to mention that the smoke from northwestern Ontario wildfires will, with that wind flow, be kind of coming back into our atmosphere. When we get systems come through and some rain showers, that does help a little bit with the air quality, but looking at even a little bit of fog tonight and then a bit of haziness tomorrow as we get a little bit of that smoke in our skies. Now, in terms of what's happening with wet conditions, there was a steadier rain along that front, again, a little further east, and that was earlier. And then behind it, there's just been a little bit of volatility with some pop-up showers. So we have that kind of through the overnight. They're pretty isolated. Into tomorrow, it's looking good once we get past that. So Wednesday looks nice, but Thursday, we're sort of bookended. This is by the next system that's coming in with this more active pattern that we have. So in the early morning hours, some bouts of rain, then a break, and then here we go into the evening hours, some thunderstorm development again. So scattered in nature, but it will be there, and so I do want you to know about that. Now tonight I mentioned the fog, so be aware. It's under the 30%. Be aware that there's going to be some reduced visibility in some cases. And again, this looks like a big rain out. It's not like that. They're pretty isolated. 20 for our low. And then tomorrow, 28 degrees. Now that cooler air will work its way in. Yes, for the long weekend. Just pushing temperatures a little below seasonal, especially as we go into Friday. And then we'll start to rebound again there. So not looking, all in all, looking pretty good for the holiday weekend.
No, absolutely. A refreshing Thursday if it's just enough.
Yes, I think many people are just quite happy to have that. I know.
No, just a bit. Thanks, Colette.
You're welcome.
And coming up, we're going to take you to Britain, where they've seen a decline in COVID-19 cases. That's next. A select committee of the United States Congress has held its first hearing on the violent attack on the U.S. Capitol building back on January 6th. There were only a few hours of testimony from 4 police officers who were on the scene. Their statements, though, powerful.
At one point, I came face to face with an attacker who repeatedly lunged for me and attempted to remove my firearm. I heard chanting from some in the crowd, "Get his gun," and kill him with his own gun.
The attack happened as the U.S. Senate was confirming the vote that gave the presidential election to Joe Biden. A mob of Donald Trump supporters overwhelmed security, smashed their way into the building in an attempt to stop the process. 5 people, including a police officer, were killed in the assault. Britain is reporting a sudden and remarkable decline in COVID-19 cases. That's despite forecasts of a significant surge that came when the country dropped most of its public health restrictions last week. The turn of events, it has scientists watching closely. CBC's Tessa Arcilia with the latest.
For the 6th straight day, there's been a fall in COVID-19 daily infections across the UK. Now, this has come as a surprise and has left scientists baffled, especially at the scale and speed with which this trend seems to be reversing. So now we're looking at infection rates that have fallen below 25,000, coming from a high of around 50,000 a day in mid-July. This seems to suggest that vaccines, as well as immunity in the population, are doing their job. But what's interesting to note is that it is a far cry from that projected high of 100,000 infections a day as soon as restrictions were lifted on the 19th of July. That simply has not happened. So some of the suggestions of why is potentially because school is out. The children are on holiday. There's no transmission happening there. Also fewer tests because there's no one in schools now. Warmer weather is also seen to be helping to drive these numbers down. But scientists are being very careful at interpreting the data. They say it's really hard to get to the bottom of why this is happening. Even British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is striking a cautious tone.
I've noticed that obviously that we're 6 days into some better figures, but it is very, very important that we don't allow ourselves to run away with premature conclusions about this. The step 4 of the opening up only took place a few days ago. People have got to remain very cautious, and that remains the approach of the government.
There is another potential reason why numbers could be going down. Some are suggesting that the end of the Euro 2020 soccer tournament is helping stop those infections. There are no more big crowds gathering to watch matches. However, there are still worries when it comes to hospitalization numbers. Those are still going up. Now, this piece of good news, it is a welcome break from pandemic woes, but the question really is this trend, this downward trend, here to stay? Tessa Arcilia, CBC News, London.
And that's it for CBC Windsor News. Don't forget, for news anytime, you can go on our website, cbc.ca/Windsor. We're on social media too. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Coronation Street is next. Thanks for watching. Have a great night.
Hello? Paul?
What we're going to say to his son?
Well, I wouldn't go to the police. I mean, it's bad publicity.
Bad pub... Are you sure you didn't leave the keys in it? Oh.